as well as to those of us who are streaming in online.
今天下午小弟要跟大家来探讨一个题目，就是当人反对我们，我们要坚定我们的信仰。
For this afternoon, we will have a discussion on keeping our faith when others are against us.
我们快要把其实我们已经把但以理书就是我们的每日读经嘛已经查完了但以理书。
Actually, in our daily morning Bible reading sessions, we are about to complete the book of Daniel.
那我们要开始的新的一个先知书叫何西阿书。
We will begin on the next prophetic book, which is known as the book of Isaiah.
也是一个小先知书
which is the book of a minor prophet.
那我想说我们在读但以理书我相信我们在读的时候，我们有一些感想。
I believe when we read the book of Daniel, we should have some insights with us.
今天下午跟大家来谈的，大家可能也很熟悉的，就是但以理的祷告。
We are going to have a discussion this afternoon, and it's something that we are familiar with. It has to do with Daniel's prayers.
其实大家都不陌生了，我觉得
Actually, all of us should not be unfamiliar.
但是我觉得这个祷告的人物以及这个信心的人物是我们都一直可以去探讨而且去学习的。
But actually, we can find out about this character of prayer, and we can learn from him.
那我们来看但以理书的第6章。
Let us take a look at Daniel chapter 6.
我们今天会锁定在这个但以理书的第6章。
Today we will channel our focus on Daniel chapter 6.
在还没有进入到正题我们先来谈一谈有关这个但以理这位人物。
Before we go into the topic proper, let us go through the details about the character Daniel.
那但以理是从小就被俘虏到巴比伦去。
From a young age, Daniel was among the captives brought to Babylon.
当然在这俘虏当中有他的朋友。
Among the captives, there were some of them were his friends.
那时就是尼布甲尼撒当政的时候。
That was during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar.
那他在这个王宫他有给了王的那个膳食。
When he was in the palace, he was offered food from the king.
可是但以理他跟他朋友拒绝。
But Daniel and his friends rejected the food.
在第1章就谈到说他不要以这些王的食物来玷污。
In chapter, according to what was written in the earlier chapter, he does not want to be defiled as a result of consuming the food.
那也跟这些膳食长说，我不吃王的食物，但是我能够比这些吃完了膳食的人的食物更加好。
He told those who are issuing out the food that he would not partake or consume the food from the king, but he will turn out, his being will be better than all those who consume the food.
你可以看到但以理的他的那个特质已经在那个时候已经慢慢的出来了。
So do we see the emerging of the unique characteristics of Daniel at that point in time?
那时候但以理借着神为这个尼布甲尼撒来解梦。
Following that, Daniel interpreted the king's dream through God.
那就是第2章跟第4章嘛。
That will be recorded in chapters 2 and 4.
那事后呢但以理也预测说这个伯沙撒王会被杀。
Following that, there was a prediction from Daniel that Belshazzar would be killed.
就是在第5章。
That will be recorded in chapter 5.
那就在当夜这个朝代就改了。
And on that night, there was a change of powers.
就是米代来接管。
So the Medes took over.
那就有大利乌王，也就是在第6章一开头谈到这个大利乌王。
Then we have the reign of King Darius, which is a character discussed in chapter 6.
那我们来看但以理书的6章的第1节，我们读到第2节。
Let us read from Daniel chapter 6, verse 1 to verse 2.
但以理书的6章1到2节。
Daniel chapter 6 verses 1 to 2. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss.
那我们继续读到第3节。
Let us continue with verse 3. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm.
但以理是一位希伯来人，被掳到巴比伦。
Daniel was a Hebrew, and he was a captive in Babylon.
但后来改朝换代，就变成这个大利乌王当政。
Through the change of political powers, King Darius took over and ruled over the land.
那波斯跟米代就接替了巴比伦。
So the Persians and the Medes took over from the Babylonians.
虽然是这样，但是这个大利乌王他看到但以理有一个美好的灵性在他里面。
Though it may be the case, King Darius could observe and identify that there was an excellent spirit in Daniel.
而且他是超乎这些众长还有众都的这些所谓的人的一切。
And he excelled over the governors, the satraps, and all the other officials.
所以王就想说要立他治理通国。
So the king thought of setting him over the entire realm, that is, over the whole kingdom.
也就是说让他能够成为这个首领了。
In other words, to set him as the leader.
这个不简单呢。
That would be something that
难道
is
他们
difficult
的
to
国
achieve.
度缺乏了这些有能干的人吗？
Could it be that they are lacking in talents to take over the kingdom?
为什么要叫一个希伯来人来去做这个事情呢？
So why must they set a Hebrew to be the head?
可见得这个大利乌王在但以理所做的、所看到的身上是不一样的。
From here we can see that King Darius observed the difference in Daniel.
所以呢，就把他封为最高的元首了，除了国王以外。
So he set him as the second man below the king.
也就是他的也就是一个首领了
In other words, he was the leader.
可是因着这样这些众长啦，还有这些众猪啦，他们就非常的不高兴。
Because of that, it aroused the unhappiness in the other officials.
所以呢，他们就有了一个计划。
So they hatched a plot.
你可以说这个计划也是一个阴谋啦。
We can say that they devised a devious
因为
plan.
后来你就看到在第4、第5、第6节，他们就看到说到底这个但以理有什么把柄可以给他们捉住
And later on in verses 4, verses 5, and verses 6, they were wondering if they could fault Daniel over something.
所以我的题目定：当人反对我们，我们要坚定我们的信仰。
So that is why I've set my topic as keep our faith when others are against us.
所以我讲的第一点就是，有信心并不总是受欢迎的。
My first point is that even if you are steadfast in faith, even if you show your faith, it doesn't mean that you are welcoming to the people surrounding.
第4节就是在谈这一点
And verse 4 covers this particular point.
你可以看到但以理他遇到这样的一个困境的时候，他没有放弃，他也没有对神失望，反倒继续向神来祷告。
We notice that Daniel, even though he was put in such a situation, he did not become disappointed or cease in worshiping God, but he continued to pray to God.
你可以看到第4节，他们想要找出他的错误过失在哪里。
And verse 4, you notice that the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel.
也就是说，他所相信的这份信仰他们不认同。
In other words, they were in disagreement with the faith that Daniel had held on to.
所以他就想说要找什么把柄能够来捉住但以理，让但以理能够失去他的这个职分
In other words, they are thinking of bringing a charge or nail a fault on Daniel so that he could be brought down.
我们可以看到在先知书甚至在旧约有很多这些先知为了来坚持他们的信仰，坚持神所要他们做的事情他们都受到很大的痛苦。
We notice that in the prophetic books as well, and in the Old Testament books, for the prophets, for the sake of persevering in their faith, they had to at the receiving end of much suffering.
耶利米为了传达神的话，
In the case of prophet Jeremiah, for the sake of conveying the word of God,
被下到这个监牢里面，
he was put into prison.
被放进去那个坑。
Yeah, it was lowered down into a pit.
那事后被挟持到埃及去，
And after that, he was brought down to Egypt.
有好几次他生命就不保了。
he was forced into Egypt, and there were a few occasions where he could not, he lost his life.
只因他坚持他的信仰，
And because of the fact that, because he was persistent in his faith,
只因他要把神的话忠心的传达出去。
and because he was faithful in his task of conveying the word of God.
所以你可以看到这些先知们这些神的仆人他们都在很多层面受到很大的这些逼迫。
So we can notice the great persecution that came upon the prophets as well as the servants of God.
所以很多时候我们的信仰不一定每个人都认同的。
So there are many occasions where we will notice that the people surrounding may not be in agreement with the faith that we hold on to.
在新约圣经谈到这个施洗约翰，
In the New Testament, we have the character John the Baptist.
他指出了这个王的这个错，
So he pointed out what the king had done wrong.
结果就被下到监牢了。
And as a result, he was imprisoned.
那事后呢，他就被斩首了。
After that, he had his hand amputated.
难道他不是忠心的仆人，为神做工作吗？
Wasn't he a faithful servant of God, working for God?
因为人不认可他的信仰。
Because the people are not accepting of his faith that he's hold on to.
保罗也坚持他的信仰，
In the case of Paul, he also persevered in his faith.
他也被下监，
He was also imprisoned.
因着传福音，他也破传了好几次。
Because of preaching the gospel, he had met with circumstances of a shipwreck.
那最后他为道来殉道。
And after that, later on, he was martyred for the word.
你可以看到这个信仰这个部分，要是你坚持不是每个人认同的。
So when we talk about the topic of faith and in the areas of perseverance in faith, not everybody will be in agreement with it.
甚至耶稣基督也警告他的门徒说要是你跟这个世界的价值观不一样你也会被拒绝的。
In the case of Jesus Christ, he reminded his disciples, if the value systems that you hold on to differs from the world, you will also be rejected.
可是今天我们信仰应该是胜过一切的。
But for all of us today, we should be able to overcome all through our faith.
这个信仰是我们的一切，
Because this faith is our all.
我们不可以妥协
There is no way we can make a compromise.
我们只可以持守，
We can only persevere.
我们只可以捉住，我们不可以放手。
We can only hold fast and not let go of our faith.
曾经有一个姐妹要结婚，
There was an occasion where this sister had planned to get married.
对方是一个外邦人。
The other party is a Gentile.
这个姐妹她认为她能够持守她的信仰。
This sister thought that even despite the marriage, she will be able to persevere in her faith.
她不会给影响她也能够坚持到底。
She would not. She thought that she would not be influenced. She would continue her faith to the end.
要嫁去的那个家庭已经告诉她了，你入门之前你一定要拜祖先。
And the family which she is going to marry into has already made it very clear to her that if she were to marry into the family, she has to be involved in ancestral worship, just like what the family members are doing.
不然的话不能够进去。
Otherwise, the marriage will not take place.
她认为她很坚强
And she thought that she's strong in her faith.
可是在她的家婆的这个打压以及逼迫之下，她屈服了。
But under the pressure and under the persecution from her mother-in-law, she gave in.
她败了，
And she went on to worship the ancestors.
信仰就失掉了。
And she lost her faith altogether.
所以今天我们在这个信仰的逼迫里面，
So therefore, when we talk about faith and we meet with persecution,
我们的价值观在哪里？
so where lies our value system?
我们真的能够持守到底吗？
Will we be able to hold on our faith to the end?
但以理给我们非常好的学习跟榜样。
So Daniel has given us very good grounds for learning, and he's a good example for us.
可是当我们在当下的时候，在面对的时候，我们能够持守到底吗？
But when we have a first-hand experience of that persecution, will we be able to hold on our faith to the end?
你才能够看到你真实的我，到底这份信仰对我有多么重要吗？
Only then will we be able to see the true nature of ourselves and where lies our faith.
所以但以理所面对的这样的一个困境 我们也会面对的。
So the predicaments that Daniel has experienced are also the ones that we will face.
我们在我们的亲朋好友，未信主的亲朋好友，以及我们的同学，以及我们的邻居，我们真的是能够把我们的信仰把它彰显出来吗？
Where we face our family members, as well as our friends, our neighbors, as well as our classmates, are we able to manifest our faith before them?
还是为了一些行方便，我们没办法表露出我们的信仰呢？
Or because of the question of convenience, we are not able to show our faith?
我们有些时候也妥协了，
So there are times where we make compromises.
使到我们的同学，使到我们的邻居，使到我们的亲朋好友看不出，我们是基督徒啊。
And because of that, our classmates, our neighbors, as well as our friends and relatives are not able to see the Christian in us.
所以有些时候啊，我们自己本身啊，要知道我们的信仰的状况如何。
Therefore, in our cases, there are times where we need to examine our faith condition.
所以有些时候啊，我们坚持我们的信仰，我们会得罪人，没有错。
There will be times where we try or make attempts to persist in our faith, and in the process of doing that, we may step on the toes of others.
所以主耶稣说啊，我们要背起他的十字架来跟从他。
That is why our Lord Jesus tells us to take up the cross and follow him.
小弟有曾经在台湾的东北区应该是南区来实习。
There was an occasion.
北区东区时区 ，East。
There was an occasion where I was sent to the eastern part of Taiwan for my practicum.
那我们就去做这个访问咯。
So we did some visitation.
在这个东区实习的时候，
So when I was practicing in the eastern region,
那就有这样的一个事情
something happened.
那我们的一些弟兄姐妹他们就会有收到一些米啦，一些援助。
Some brothers and sisters have received amounts of or packets of rice as well as
有一个慈善机构啦，叫慈济
there was a charity organization known as Chi Foundation.
那他们就会在一个区里面去派发这些粮食给他们。
So they will go around a particular region or district to distribute food to the residents there.
有些时候拿人东西就手就软了。
So there are times where the recipients, because they have received something good from someone, their hands become so-called softened, so to speak.
他坦白讲是一个好意嘛，送米给你给你吃帮助你
So it's a goodwill. They are giving out packets of rice and food, and it is of help to the recipient.
可是你好处拿多了，你的那个信仰的坚持，还有你就没办法真正的握得很紧了。
So when you are at the receiving end of the good things, in terms of you holding on to your faith, you will not be able to have a very tight grip.
当然他们不是穷到说没有饭吃，没有米吃，因为坦白讲，在台湾政府都很照顾国民了
And for the residents, they are not in a very dire state of poverty to the extent that they have no food to eat, because the Taiwanese government takes good care of their citizens.
尤其在这些山区、原住民区政府都很照顾的。
And the government is particularly having an interest in taking care of the people in the hill regions and the Aborigines.
可是问题就是，他们拿了这些食物以后他们就不可以坚持。
But the problem is, when they receive all these amounts of food from the people who are giving out, they are not able to persist.
所以有一些什么所谓的一些拜拜的这种聚会啦，他们会邀请他，你可以帮忙一下吗？你没有拜只是帮忙一下折一些东西而已没事
And for the recipients, sometimes they are being approached. They were told that those people who are giving out the food are going to organize worship services. So they will be asked to help out in the logistics. And they are being pacified, saying that they will not be involved in the worship activities. They are only involved in the logistics.
有些时候你拿久了，你做久了以后，那个线就不是那么清楚了，就有点模糊了。
So as they continue to receive these foods over a long period of time, the line, between what ought to be done and what can be done in their faith becomes blurred.
这个是另外一种挑战。
So this is another challenge that we face.
用着这种给你米啦，给你一些虚用品来让你在信仰上站立不住。
So this tactic uses is through the giving out the rice and the necessities of life, they will cause the recipients not to be able to stand firm in their faith.
所以今天我们要怎么样来坚持我们的信仰？
So the question is, how are we able to keep our faith today?
要是我们坚持我们信仰，有些时候很多人会对我们所坚持的感冒。
So when we keep our faith, there will be people who will be apprehensive over what we are trying to do.
有如但以理我们刚才所看到的。
Just as we can see in the example of Daniel earlier.
所以呢，这些人就继续要想办法来办但以理让他就是把他除掉了
So in other words, these people are trying to get rid of Daniel.
所以呢，在从第4到第9节就谈到他们要设一个计谋一个阴谋来办他。
Verses 4 to 9 was about the devising of a plot to bring Daniel down.
那他们想找出到底他有什么错误的过失能够来办他呢？
So they were trying to find out, is there a way to find fault with Daniel and then they can bring a charge against him?
第5节请念。
That will be in verse 5. Verse 5, Daniel 6 verse 5. Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God.
4到5节谈得很清楚，他说只是找不着他的错误的过失，因他忠心办事，毫无错误过失。所以第5节说真的找不着除非是按照他所信的神的那个律法来去办他，否则的话找不到。
For verses 4 and 5, verse 4 says they are not able to find any charge of fault in Daniel because he was faithful. Then in verse 5, they said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God.
这个也给我们很好的一个学习
So this is also a good point of learning for us.
今天我们要要是有人要找我们麻烦的话，
So today, if someone wants to find trouble with us,
我们能够像但以理这样吗？
will we be able to behave like Daniel?
人家找不出他到底有什么过失能够去办他的。
No one is able to find any fault in Daniel that they can bring a charge against him.
这个也无形当中在荣耀他所敬拜的这位独一的真神
So without form, all this happened and it brings glory to the God whom he worshipped.
可是我们呢？
But what about all of
我们
us?
想一想，
Let us think for the moment.
我们说我们坚持我们的信仰，
We say that we keep our faith, we persist in our faith.
那个是好的，
This is a good practice.
那个
This is
应
good,
该要做的。
and this is something that we must do.
可是问题是，当人家要找我们麻烦的时候，
The question is, if someone wants to find fault with us,
我们真的像但以理这样无过无失，能够让别人找不出我们的过失吗？
are we able to be found blameless, just like Daniel,
除了信仰以外，
apart from the faith that we hold on to?
我们真的能够有如那些人要找不出，只可以找出他的优点，在他的优点里面荣耀神。
Are we able to be just like Daniel, where no fault can be found by the troublemakers? They could only identify the good points, and as a result, glory is given to God.
所以呢，既然找不出所以这些人就想说到底我还能够让他在哪个方面能够找出，让他来办他。
Because they could not find any fault in Daniel, so that was why they put in further thoughts to find out what else can they point what else can they do to find fault in Daniel?
于是啊，他们就商讨啦，全部啊这些这些总督啦，还有这些总长啦，他们就商量啊，要怎么样来害他。
So the governors and satraps gathered together to have a discussion to find out what is it that they can do to find a charge against Daniel.
他知道但尼里天天都祷告，
And the point that they know was that Daniel made a daily prayers.
找到这个机会了。
So an opportunity came for them.
好，我们来看第七节读到第8节。
Let us take a look at Daniel chapter 6, verses 7 to 8. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter.
你看到他们真的是很阴险呐、
So we realize that they are being very crafty.
因为找不到他有什么过失能够办他，所以呢，就在他的信仰上来攻击他。
Because they could not find any fault against Daniel beyond his faith, so they had to do so within his faith.
他也知道但尼里每天要祷告，所以不可能30天不祷告啊。
They knew that Daniel made daily prayers, and it would not be possible for Daniel to stay away from prayers for 30 days.
这个是有阴谋的，而且这个阴谋是有很大家商讨是策划就是要来害他了，
So there is an evil nature in this plan to bring Daniel down.
是一定可以办到他。
And they deemed that the plot that they had set would definitely be able to eliminate
也
Daniel.
让他在这样的一个情况底下，能够被这个狮子来撕裂被狮子吃掉。
And they put him into the corner, and he shall be cast into the den of the lions to be destroyed by the lions.
所以我们大家都知道这个故事嘛。但尼里因为要祷告，所以呢守住信仰，所以就被丢到那个狮子坑嘛。
And all of us know about the story. Daniel made his prayers as usual, and as a result, he was caught and put into the lion's den.
虽然有这样的一个禁令说不可以向神还有人跪拜，只可以向国王。可是但尼里他怎么样回应这个禁令呢？
For this forbidding decree, it was stipulated that they are not to make any petitions towards their gods as well as to any other man except the king. But what was the response of Daniel towards this decree?
我们来看9到10节。
Let us take a look at Daniel 6 verses 9 and 10.
请念。
Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days.
不知道我们遇到这样的一个情况，有如但尼里的时候，我们会被树长上楼，窗开着不是关开着，向神来祷告呢？
When we are put into the shoes of Daniel, will we do the same thing as Daniel? Go to the upper room, open his windows, not shutting them, but open his windows and pray towards God.
不是一次是1日3次。
And he did not do it once. He did it 3 times a day.
双腿跪下在他神面前祷告，感谢没有说哎呀为什么遇到这样，是感谢神
He knelt down before God with his 2 knees down, and he prayed and gave thanks
他
before
说
his God.
与素常一样，
And as stated over here, as was his custom.
也就是说他是照常祷告，
In other words, he prayed as what he usually does.
他没有因为这样不祷告。
He did not, on account of the change in the situation, he refrained from praying.
也没有给理由说哎呀这一次30天不祷告，神应该也不会怪我吧。
He did not give himself an excuse that if he stays away from prayer, God would not blame me for doing so.
我心中祷告就好啦，
It can also be possible for me to make silent prayers
我
within
没
my
有
heart.
弃掉这个信仰，我也没有忘记神啊，
I've not abandoned my faith. I've not departed from God.
所以神可以了解的。
So definitely God will be understanding
为
of
什
what I'm
么
going
为什
through.
么要那么坚持？
So why must I be so on the ball to persist?
我现在保护我的生命啊，使到我能够继续的为神做工。以后嘛，反正30天后，我照常还可以为神做工啊。
I'm trying to keep my physical life. I just bear with it for this 30 days. After 30 days, I can still serve God as before.
你可以看到但尼里是没有妥协，
So we realize that Daniel did not compromise in his faith.
在面对这样的一个强大的挑战摆在面前，他继续向神来祷告。
In the face of a great challenge before him, he continued in his practice of praying to God.
所以从第10节到28节
So from Daniel chapter 6 verses 10 to 28,
就是谈到说信心总是在祷告中找到帮助。
it discusses that faith through prayers will give rise to the extending of help.
那但尼里对这个王的这个禁令的回应是什么呢？就是祷告
What was the response of Daniel towards the king's decree? That was to pray,
继续祷告
to continue in prayers.
开着那个窗户，就是向神来祷告，不是秘密的祷告就是照常的这样向神来祷告。
Then he opened the windows to pray to God. He did not do it concealing himself, but he do it openly.
他也知道
as usual.
这样子做的后果就是被丢进这个狮子坑。
And he knew the consequence of doing so. That is, he will be put into the lion's den.
看起来我们再看下去的话，好像似乎这个王束手无策他也想说要救但尼里，可是这个命令那个禁令已经下了，没办法把它收回来
And as we continue to read the story, it appeared that King Darius was helpless. He wanted to save Daniel, but there was no way he could do a reverse of his decree.
那怎么办呢？
So what was he to do?
继续坚持他的信仰。
So in the case of Daniel, he continued to persist in his faith.
他的3个朋友也都一样
It goes the same for his 3 friends.
他就是不拜，被丢进火炉烧，他也照样不拜。
They did not worship or bow down to the image, even in the face of the threat of being put into the fiery furnace.
这些青年从这个应许之地被掳到巴比伦他仍然保守他们的信仰。
For all these youths, they were brought from the promised land all the way to Babylon as captives, but they continued in their faith.
为什么呢？
Why was it the case?
因为他对他所信的神是100%相信的。
Because they have absolute faith and belief in the God whom they worship.
也因为这样，所以他们坚持他们的信仰。
And because of that, they continued and persisted in their faith.
虽然遇到这样的一个困难，甚至生命都不保，他们仍然坚持。
Though in the difficult situation and their lives are at stake, but they still continued.
我们今天重新再看我们的信仰的时候，
So for all of us today, as we take a relook at our faith,
我们会不会在当下妥协呢？
will we compromise in the midst of pressure?
我们会在当下说，为了救自己的生命，没关系啦，反正他要做什么，要叫我做什么，我就做什么。为了保住我的生命使到以后留条命嘛，能够为神来做工
Will we, on account of the fact that our lives are endangered, so we compromise and we toe the line and accede to doing what is against our faith and hoping that in future we just realign back to our faith?
其实在我们台湾的山区在南澳这个地方也有很多美好的见证。
In the hill regions, especially in Nan'ao of Taiwan, there are many beautiful testimonies from that region where our church
就是捉住信仰不妥协。
they had this good example of holding on to their faith and not compromising in their faith no matter what happens.
有一个姐妹叫百合
There is a sister by the name of Sister Bai He.
她因为坚持她的信仰，
because she wants to hold on to her faith.
那时候应该是在就是二战以后了大概是在50年代的时候。
This happened in the 1950s after the Second World War.
应该是50年代，对，没有错。
Yes.
那我们知道那时台湾还是属于日本的殖民地嘛。
During that time, Taiwan was still a colony of the Japanese.
那信仰也不是那么所谓的那么自由啦。
So when it comes to practicing religion, they are not. It is not that liberal.
所以很多时候他们都要在躲躲藏藏的在不是在公众的这样的来聚会。
So very often, religious activities have to be conducted underground. They cannot do it in the open.
虽然百合她本身她是想要去传福音
Though Sister Bai He had this desire to preach the gospel.
那后来她就被捕了。
But later on, she was caught.
被打。
And she was stricken.
那后来就被释放了。
And after that, she was set free.
可是她没有因为这样的这个事情她就妥协了，就不传啦，没有。
So during the time when she was in captivity, she did not on account of that cease from her desire to preach the gospel.
后来他们就聚会就是躲躲藏藏，就是晚上在那个河川这样的来聚会
So later on, they still continue with their worship activities, but they do not do it in the open. They do it by the riverside.
On the river bank.
On the river bank.
他们就是在那个时候这样的来聚会的。
So that was the manner of service during those circumstances.
不像我们这样那么舒服有冷气你看都没有那个河水这样冲流没有嘈杂声我们都可以这样聚会很舒服
It is unlike all of us being in a cool air-conditioned room and without the sound of the river waters.
可是那时的那些弟兄姐妹就是在那种逼迫之下来聚会的。
But that was the experience of the brothers and sisters. They continued to have the services despite the persecution that they were facing.
后来就被抓。
And after that, they were arrested.
这次就被打。
And after following that, they were stricken. They were hit.
就打得很严重。
And how severe was their strickening?
后来因为这样，这个百合就殉道了。
And because of that, Sister Bai He was martyred.
可是因为这样的一种逼迫
But it is because of the persecution faced by the brothers and sisters.
反倒这些弟兄姐妹没有妥协
And these brothers and sisters did not compromise.
坚持信仰
They continued to hold fast to their faith.
后来他们就逃到这个富士那边了
And at a later stage, they made their escape to the region called Fushi.
富士弟兄姐妹也热情的接待他们。
And the brothers and sisters at Fushi welcomed them warmly.
可是这些弟兄姐妹难道不怕吗？
So when we talk about the receiving brothers and sisters, aren't they afraid that they will be implicated?
你们坚持什么？
What is it that you're trying to persevere with?
这是聚会而已嘛，为什么要搞到这样呢？这丧失自己的生命，需要这样吗？
It is just a service. Do we need to do it to such an extent that you lose your lives?
不可以就在家里上网去对不起，那时没有嘛对不起，我是说反正停一下子 OK 吧，没关系啦。
If you're not able to have services, it will be fine to cease having regular services for a short period.
何必要坚持？
So why is it that you're so insistent that you must hold an on-site service?
可是就是有这些弟兄姐妹不怕死的。
But because of these brothers and sisters who are fearless of death.
所以信仰这个福音才能够广传
It is because of their fearless nature that the gospel spread it far and wide.
越逼迫这个道理传得越快
The greater the persecution, the greater the spread, or the faster the spread of the word of God.
使徒行传不是这样吗？
Isn't that the same case in Acts of the
我们
Apostles?
读到7章，那个福音还在耶路撒冷
When we read to Acts of the Apostles chapter 7, the gospel still remain in Jerusalem.
直到史提反的事件被石头打死了，哎呦，大家逃了，因为被逼迫嘛，所以 开始才传福音了。
It is only till the account of Stephen when he was martyred, he was stoned, that everybody scattered, and that enabled the spreading of the gospel.
我们今天是不是要碰到逼迫，我们才能够把福音传得更快呢？
So for all us today, is it a case where we need to be at the receiving end of persecution in order to enable the greater speed of the spreading the gospel?
我们太舒服了，
Actually, we are all in our comfort zone.
也太安逸了
We are all at ease.
啊！所以呢，我们就没有这种急迫性啊，要把福音传出去。
That is why we lack the urgency to want to spread the gospel.
逼迫越大，恩典越大，
The greater the persecution, the greater the grace that will be bestowed.
更加能够看到神的作为。
We will be able to see the works of God
啊，
clearly.
当然我不希望说我们要受到逼迫了啊。
Definitely, I'm not hoping that all of us will, or persecution to come upon us.
我们只希望说啊，在这个很好的环境，神给我们那么好的环境，我们应该要把握机会啊，来去广传福音。
We hope that we have this acknowledgement and the realization that we are in a comfort zone, and all the more, we should, on account of that, preach the gospel.
但是就是在这种逼迫还有这种困难的时候啊，才能够看到我们真实的信仰。
But it is in times of persecution and in extreme difficulty that we can see our faith condition clearly.
有如但尼里这样，
Just like Daniel, just like what happened to Daniel.
他没有后悔，他就被这样的坚持他信仰，被丢到狮子坑。
Without a regret, he held fast to his faith, and after that, he was thrown into the lion's den.
死就死嘛，反正我是为我的信仰来牺牲，我愿意。
If I perish, I'll perish. Anyway, I am sacrificing myself on account of my faith, and I'm willing to go through it all.
所以6章的16节说啊，王下命令，人就把但尼里带来，扔在狮子坑中。王对但尼里说啊，你所常侍奉的神啊，他必救你。听读。
Daniel 6, verse 16. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you.
这个是王对但尼里所说的话，
These are the words spoken by the king to Daniel.
因为王也束手无策啊，他也没办法，因为他下达了这个禁令啊，他也没办法收回啊。
Because the king's hands were tied, he issued this decree. There was no way he could revoke or deissue that decree.
就是这位神啊，拯救了但尼里啊。
It's God who has delivered Daniel.
我们来看22节，
Let us take a look at verse 22.
哎，请念
Daniel 6, verse 22.
22节。
Verse 22. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you.
但尼里真的是问心无愧，没有做什么错事，只是坚持信仰，捉住信仰，所以就被丢到狮子坑啊。
Daniel had a clear conscience. There was no wrongdoing in him. It's just that he held fast to his faith, and because of that, the consequence was being thrown into the lion's den.
啊，所以神啊也派使者来封住这个狮子的口啊。
For this reason, God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth.
狮子以为说哇，大餐温饱了，哇，看到那么好啊，可以吃啊，哎，结果没得吃啊。
The lions saw that there's delicious Daniel in front of it. As a result, they were not able to eat Daniel up.
啊，这个王啊，在那个王宫啊，他也不好受啊。
And when they are in the palace, it was not easy going for
18
them.
节
That's in verse 18.
王回宫啊，昼夜禁食，无人拿乐器到他面前，并睡不着啊。Verse 18.
Daniel 6, verse 18. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him.
你可以看到这样的一个对称吗？
So do we notice this comparison?
啊，神封住了 这个狮子，使到他不成为但尼里不成为这狮子的这个美食啊。
God shut the lion's mouth so that Daniel will not become the prey or the delicious meal of the lions.
可是，在当夜，这个王也没得吃啊，他禁食啊，为了这件事情。
So, but yet for this king, he did not touch his food. He spent the night fasting.
你可以看到，当一个人坚持他的信仰到底的时候，
So we notice if a person is persistent in his faith.
而且是但尼里的祷告，
And when we speak about Daniel's prayers,
神后来除了开路以外，
following that is the opening of a way by God.
他的结果是什么？
And what would that lead to?
当然，但尼里的生命被拯救了，没有错。
Definitely Daniel was delivered.
可是故事到最后是怎么样的呢？
But what was the ending of the story?
我们来看26到27节。
Let us read verses 26 and 27. Daniel 6 verses 26 and 27. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions.
所以我们有3个结论。
So we have 3 conclusions.
第一个就是试探伴随着就是胜利。
The first conclusion is with following temptation is victory.
那的确的，狮子没有伤害但尼里，
Indeed, it is true the lions caused no injury on Daniel.
看起来他好像遇到那么大的危险，
It may appear that Daniel was placed in great danger,
靠着祷告，靠着神，他胜过了。
and he was able to see victory through prayer and through God.
第二个结论
The second conclusion,
是王呼吁他的民要归向主啊。
God called out to his name to turn to the Lord,
The king,
turn to the king.
the king call out the people to turn to the Lord.
The king called out to the people in his kingdom to turn to the God of Daniel.
因为神在这个整个世纪当中他是掌控了一切，而且呢，在这个因为但尼里的坚持，所以呢，神的名得到荣耀。
God is in control of the whole situation, and because of the persistence of Daniel, God's name is glorified.
第3个结论，
And the third conclusion,
在火中证明了真实的信心对人的影响是甚大的。
in the midst of fire, faith proving through under fire impacts others for Christ.
因为这样能够归向神，因为这样也可以归向基督。
Because of what Daniel has gone through, people turn to God. And because of that, people turn to Christ.
所以不管今天有谁反对我们，
So whoever our opposers may be today,
信仰是唯一我们能够捉住的。
as the faith is the only one thing that we can grasp hold of.
是最有价值的，
It is one that is of value.
所以我们不应该随意的放掉。
So we will not casually or simply let go of our faith.
我们虽然要经历一些痛苦，
Though we may have to experience pain,
但是我们要坚持到底。
but we must persist to the end.
所以约翰长老，我们最后来看一个圣经章节来做结束。
Let us look at the final Bible verses.
我们来看约翰一书的5章第4节。
Let us turn to 1 John chapter 5 verse 4.
约翰一书5章4节，
1 John chapter 5 verse 4.
因为凡从神生的，就胜过世界，使我们胜过世界的，就是我们的信心啦。请念。
1 John chapter 5 verse 4. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith.
所以求神保守我们的信仰，也能够让我们的信仰能够坚定在他的真理里面不改变。
May God preserve our faith, that our faith will be steadfast in the truth, and we remain unchanging.
想起但尼里所作所为，能够给我们信心能够再加上一些心力。
Let us recall how Daniel reacted and behaved in the circumstances that we are in, that we can be strengthened in faith as a result.
我们来唱诗484首。